Good evening. How's everybody doing tonight? So on behalf of KPCC and LAist, welcome to the El Portal Theater in North Hollywood. I'm John Cohn.
And I'm Ashley Alvarado. We're the co-producers of Unheard LA. Welcome to our third season.
Southern California is full of untold stories, but even more that go unheard.
And that's why we're here, to showcase authentic, first-person experiences of life in Southern California. Real people amplified.
Each show is unique because of who's involved and where we are. Some of our folks are experienced storytellers. Many are not. And for some, this is their first time on stage or speaking in public.
KPCC is a non-advocacy, non-partisan media organization, and tonight's show is reflective of the range of voices, experiences, and perspectives of those involved.
Together, we explore our region one story at a time.
We want to give a special thank you to the California Wellness Foundation for their generous support of the project. If you do have photos you want to share or want to see what others are posting, we're on Twitter and Instagram at KPCC in person, and tonight we're using the hashtag UnheardLA.
And now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming your Unheard LA host, Bruce Lemon.
What's good, LA? Welcome to Unheard LA, live from North Hollywood. Give it up for your town. This is the live storytelling series starring you. Yes, you, our friends and neighbors from all over this city. I am Bruce Lemon, and I am your host. Welcome to the premiere of Season 3. You know, coincidentally, it was 2 years ago today that we even announced this entire adventure that we're on right now. So thank you for riding around town with us. And if you're new, we'll let you ride shotgun for this bit of audience participation. Who's here for their first Unheard LA? A lot of new faces. How about our regulars? Who's been here before? All right, this is my favorite part, all right? On the count of three, everybody rep your city. Just shout it out. 1, 2, 3. Yes. What was that over here? What? Jacksonville. Ooh, you made it out. Thanks for coming out. Anybody here from North Hollywood? Nice. We got some regulars from some locals in the house. Now me, I'm from Watts, and after going to college in Virginia and grad school in New York City, I came back here to pursue acting. So I spent a whole lot of time in North Hollywood. Doing theater for $11 a show, getting parking tickets I cannot afford and never paid, and eating Brussels sprouts at the Federal right across the street, which I'm definitely doing after this show, with some old friends in the house and some new. It's a circle that's ever expanding. In 2 years, we've had about 90 storytellers. 90. Many of them new to speaking in front of hundreds of people and having video take it out to many, many more. And why? Why do we do this? Why do we think it's important for us to hear you? Because it's magic. The magic that happens when we listen. The magic that happens when we connect. We can relate. My grandma came to our Lawndale show last season. Yeah. Maryland. And she was so connected to the stories that she heard up here. She heard parts of her life in the stories that were shared on this stage. In that show, Sheila Reed shared this story about how she was making her way to LA from the Midwest to teach. And the first place she landed was LA. Well, just outside of LA, in San Bernardino. My grandma was so excited when she heard this story because that was also her late husband's story. And Sheila, if you're watching, she told me to give you a hug from her. Yeah. In our first season, she watched the episode online where Koji Sakai shared his family's story of the Japanese internment of the 1940s. And she was a child here in LA when her Japanese neighbors were taken from their home. And she never talked about this, probably because I never asked, but after hearing those stories, she was activated, and the stories just came flowing out of her like a broken dam. Now, she passed away earlier this month. but in our last few visits, we sifted through old photo albums, and she shared so many stories with me. Stories that she probably wouldn't have. Stories that I likely would never have asked her for, but stories I needed to hear. And stories my mom needed to hear as well. She was also in that photo with my grandma, and she's here for every show for that reason. So regardless if you're an Unheard LA regular, like my mom, or a first-timer, you're in good company, and we hope you enjoy the ride. Yeah. Now here to talk about his first time, and to kick off season 3, please welcome Jonathan Tipton Meyers.
It's September 2014. I am on the corner of Santa Monica and La Brea at a red light. It's my first night driving for Lyft, and I am freaking out because I've been driving for 15 minutes and there are no rides coming in. I know I did everything I was supposed to. I uploaded my driver's license and my registration and my insurance. I took my driving test with Daryl, my mentor, behind the Tommy's Burger on Bronson. I got my picture taken behind the fake Ivy background. I mean, why aren't there any rides coming in? And then it hits me. Rideshare is oversaturated. Yeah, it's too many drivers, there's not enough rides, and I am too late. Just like I was too late to become a writer at 50, too late to save my marketing company from going under, too late to keep my girlfriend Susan from walking out on me, and now I'm too late to save my mortgage, and I'm gonna lose my house, and ding, 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 and a ride comes in. And I'm pushing to accept it, but it's not accepting. And then the light turns green, and the guy behind me starts honking, and it finally accepts, and I put my foot on the gas, and now I'm driving down Santa Monica Boulevard like I've never driven in West Hollywood before in my life. And I'm looking for 321 North Sweetser, and I'm panicked. I'm like, Sweetser, and it's, there it is. And I turn down the block, and I look for the address, but I can't find it because you can't find any address in Los Angeles because the numbers are so tiny and they're hidden, and then like, and where are the street lights? But there are 2 guys, and they're standing at the end of the block with carry-on bags. There's Andy, 30s, who's organically attractive. And then there's Simon, who's 20s, who's like super hot. And they're both standing there in like jeans and crisp t-shirts with their carry-on bags, and they see me, and then they start waving their hands like crazy, like I'm the guy in the rescue helicopter that's discovered their desert island message, and they come running out into the middle of the street, and literally I have to stop the car, and Simon leans in and he says, Jonathan? And I look at him, I'm like, Simon? And he's like, yeah, and I'm like, yeah, and we're like, oh God, thank God. And Andy leans in and he says, sorry, this is our first Lyft. We're virgins. And I'm like, yeah, me too. And so they go around to the back of the car and I meet them, and then we stand there because we don't know who's supposed to put the luggage in the car. And so we both do it. And right, we get in, they get in the back, I get around the front, and they didn't put in their destination, but I know where they're going. LAX, John. I was like, okay. LAX, first ride, at night, awesome. So I start the ride, and I'm driving, and then it hits me, I don't know these people. Like, I have 2 strangers in the back of my car. In my car! Like, where I've eaten takeout with my friends, where I've lip-synced to Kendrick Lamar, where I've made out with Susan on our second date while she DJ'd the CD player, which reminded me, hey guys, there's water back there if you want. And they're like, water! And their eyes light up like it's Christmas. And Andy's like, no, we're fine. But Simon's like, no, I'm getting some. And he grabs a bottle. And then Andy grabs one and whispers, I feel like we're drinking his water. And he goes, no, it's for us. And I'm like, yeah, and there's cables back there if you guys want to charge your phones. And they're like, wow, and they pull out their phones and they plug them in, and they're laughing, and all of a sudden Andy says, wow, this is so nice. I mean, like, we weren't sure if you were going to show up, and we just called, and you're here, and you're wonderful, and God, people doing things for each other in this town, it's just nice. And I'm like, yeah, it's really nice. And I'm smiling, and they're smiling, and I'm smiling so much that I didn't look at the GPS, and it's like rerouted me 2 times. But they don't care because they're busy drinking water and charging their phones. And, they're going back to Philadelphia to get the rest of Simon's things because Simon's finally moving out here. They've had a long-distance relationship for about a year. But Andy didn't have the courage to tell him directly. He just planned their vacations together so that when they were there, he could say something spontaneous like, well, as long as we're here. And but he slipped. And Simon looks at him and says, well, why didn't you just ask me? I mean, were you afraid I was going to say no? You got to have a little faith in people, which is the last line to the movie Manhattan, which is my favorite movie, because that final expression on Woody Allen's face as he's standing in that doorway struggling to believe that good things can happen in his life gets me every single time. And right then, Andy asks me, so, John, what do you do? And I said, that's a good question. I came out here as a performer, a writer. I made a little money until casting people couldn't figure out what color I was. And then I started a business and bought a house, and I got sidetracked. And Simon leans in and he says to me, no, honey, you sidetracked yourself. Which hit me like a brick in the stomach. And I'm shaken, and I don't know what to say, so we just drive, past the oil wells on La Cienega in silence until we reach LAX. Now, LAX at night is gorgeous and super intimidating, but I don't know why. I mean, it's just a circle, right? You get lost, you just come right back around, but I think it's existential. If we're not moving forward, then we're not making any progress. And so I pull over to the terminal, and they get out of the car, and they take their own bags out of the back, and they're standing there. And before I know it, I get out too. They both open their arms, and in one move, they both wrap their arms around me and give me a giant hug. Right? So we're all standing there hugging at the Delta terminal when Simon leans into me, and he whispers, faith, Jonathan. So I watch them leave, and then I get in the car, and I just sit there. I don't remember how long, until the airport cop, he's like bangs on the window, and I drive away, and I'm heading up the 105, and I'm thinking, where did it go? My faith, like, where did it go? I had a lot of faith when I came out here, and I am going to have to get that back.
History happens here. Many of the country's most iconic moments have featured LA as a backdrop or a major character. But how we remember that history can shift dramatically according to our unique perspectives. Here to share hers, please welcome Pat Aldorete.
Hey, did you guys hear about Bobby Kennedy coming to town? Chata's head snapped in my direction. Don't lie, Esa. It's true, I said. I heard it on the news, eh? Wow, this is big time, Chata said. When's he coming? Bobby's coming tomorrow, I said. He's gonna come down Brooklyn Avenue. We could see Brooklyn Avenue from where we were sitting, and we looked towards it as though Bobby could show up at any moment. It was the main street in the Maravilla section of East Los Angeles where we lived. Rosie waved her hand lazily. So what if he's coming? What do you mean, so what? I demanded. Yeah, esa, Chata joined in. Bobby was with Cesar Chavez when he was on that hunger strike. Besides, I added, who's left now that Martin Luther King got killed? Rosie looked at us. You think Bobby Kennedy cares about us? Hell yeah, I do, I said. Haven't you heard him or seen the places he goes? You don't see Nixon in East LA. And I hope we never do see that pinche payaso, Chata said. My brother said Nixon would ship him to Vietnam. Yeah, Chata said, Bobby's one of us. He's gonna stop the war. You'll see, things will get better when he's president. The next evening, Chata and I went down to Brooklyn Avenue to wait for Bobby Kennedy to come. Both sides of the street were lined up and down with people, eyes shining and smiling. There was tension, but it didn't scare me like it usually did. Instead, I felt like I could talk with anybody. I looked around and wondered whether Bobby would notice how clean the streets were, cleaned for him. To my left was East Los Angeles College, the pride of the neighborhood. Then came the 3 blocks of houses that had been built for World War II vets like our dads, who still measured each other by the rank they had once held. Then the housing projects, and the park, and then more houses. My mother and brother walked over to us, moving easily through the crowd. We were impatient to see Bobby, and he was running late. An older man in faded brown work clothes said, Ya verás, Bobby va a venir. He may be late, but he'll be here. My mom nodded her head. The man smiled. Bobby's gonna finish what his brother, the president, started. Pobrecito. When Bobby's president, it'll be a better day. And even though I was born here, for the first time I feel like this country will be my country. His eyes glistened. From the east, we heard a roar growing louder and louder. People all around us surged towards the street, moving us along. He's coming! He's coming! Somebody yelled. The crowd chanted, Bobby! 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 We saw the car snaking its way towards us, a huge ball of people crowding around it. As it got closer, we could hear gasping coming from the crowd. Then the car was directly in front of me, and Bobby was reaching his hand out. I saw him and sucked in my breath. He was blonde and blue-eyed. I knew he was white, but it was still shocking to see. He looked darker on television. His freckles didn't show up. But he was ours, and I got over it real quick and squeezed his hand. His grip was firm and sent a bolt of electricity up my arm. It was over in a second, and he moved on. I heard a man's voice yelling, Stop the car! We gotta hang her on here! I looked over, and there was Chata, her arms wrapped around Bobby, snuggling against him and refusing to let go. Bobby never stopped smiling. He didn't seem to mind Chata at all. His bodyguards peeled her off him, and the car crawled forward again. We stood there dazed and happy. We held our right hands up as though we would never let anything touch it again. Even my brother was smiling. The older man we'd seen before yelled, Viva Bobby! Viva Bobby! The crowd took up the cheer. Everyone was in a great mood, laughing and smiling. Ya ves, the man said to my mother, didn't I say he would come? Bobby won't let us down. The next Tuesday night, we watched Bobby win the California primary on television. It was at a fancy place called the Ambassador Hotel, and it was packed with shrieking, joyous people. Look, I pointed at the screen, there's Dolores Huerta. Dolores Huerta had co-founded the United Farm Workers Organizing Committee, along with Cesar Chavez, but you usually didn't hear much about her. They were the only Chicanos I ever saw on television that weren't bandidos, and I got excited every time I saw them. It was getting late and I was sleepy, but I didn't want to go to bed. I lay down on the couch and fell asleep. Wake up! Wake up! Nico was shaking me by the shoulders. I had slept on the sofa lots of times and didn't understand why he was bothering me about it. Leave me alone, I groaned. Bobby's been shot. I bolted up. The tears in my brother's eyes were real. He pointed to the television. Newscaster Baxter Ward looked dead serious. Senator Robert F. Kennedy has been shot. His condition is reported as extremely critical. My mother sat between my brother and me, crying hard. Both Nico and I put our arms around her. We sat silently, watching the television, and even though we pulled blankets around us, we were chilled through and through. 26 hours later, Bobby was dead. He was 42 years old.
Our lives can be so spread out sometimes that we get so accustomed to going from one place to another and missing everything in between. Well, there are many ways to get around, and trying something new can grant you new insight, new perspectives, and maybe even a new friend. Here to share, please welcome John P. Smith.
I want to tell you about a friend of mine and how I came to change the dressing on his stab wounds behind a parking garage. But first, a couple of things you should know. My friend Barry and I live in the same Studio City neighborhood. And while I live in a small house, Barry has no house. Barry is homeless. But before I tell you more about Barry, I need to share a little more about my history because I don't think I would have gotten to know him if I didn't bicycle. You see, for the last 15 years or so, I've used a bike for about 95% of my transportation needs. I began riding when I was stationed with the Air Force in Nebraska. This was during the time when same-sex marriage was first emerging into the national conversation. And not to be political, but my coworkers, by and large, were some of the most socially conservative people you'd ever meet. As a closeted gay man, it became increasingly difficult for me to listen to their hurtful commentary about people like me. I began to wonder if this is how they talked when they thought only straight people were around. Or worse, did they suspect me of being gay, and their comments were for my benefit? I struggled with how anyone could be that cruel to another human being. My mental health deteriorated and had become so dark that I began to fantasize about various workplace violence scenarios. Then one day, out of the blue, a coworker, Dave, asked me if I ever considered bike riding. I hadn't, and though I showed no interest in cycling, he was insistent I talk to Ray, a retired B-52 pilot and an avid cyclist who biked to work every day. Perhaps my mental state was beginning to show outwardly. As a devout Catholic, Dave did share our other coworkers' views, but he didn't share their cruelty. So mostly to mollify him, I went and spoke to Ray about cycling. Ray convinced me to give it a try, and though still a little skeptical, I bought my first bike as an adult and started riding to base. Now, I don't know why Dave was so adamant I talked to Ray. I doubt he did either, but maybe he just listened to the voice in his head. What I do know is that it saved my life, and probably a few of my coworkers. Not only did it save my life, it also changed my life. Riding almost immediately began to change my mental health. Comments that used to lash as if delivered by whip were now like water on a duck's back. I began to see the world in a different perspective, and I've been riding ever since. After retiring from the Air Force in 2012, I wanted to try and make a go of a second career in what I went to college for, so I moved to Los Angeles to try my hand at screenwriting. As a writer, I'm always on the lookout for a good spot for thinking and writing, and I found such a spot in a pocket park behind a parking garage. This is where I first met Barry. I had been coming there for several months and noticed that he appeared to live there. He must have noticed me too, because one day he came over and started a conversation. Now, I don't recall what we talked about that day, but we chatted for an hour or so when he offered me a can of beer, which I accepted. Over time, I discovered he didn't actually sleep in the park, but around the corner from it. One summer evening, I was riding back from the store when I heard Barry calling over to me. And once again, he offered me a beer, and I gladly accepted. This is when I discovered he not only liked my company, but seemed eager for any company. It must be torture for a smart guy like him to not be able to regularly engage in meaningful conversation. Over the years in which I've gotten to know him, I've watched as he tries to engage strangers in conversation, and they simply ignore him. A few respond as they keep walking. I get it. He's an intoxicated guy trying to talk to them. I mean, he's not falling down drunk, but he's clearly had a few. People can't know how harmless he really is. I think Barry does this because he's so used to being ignored. It's his way of trying to get some recognition of his humanity. Last summer, I was at the park, and I hadn't seen Barry in months when another guy told me he had been stabbed. When he's really drunk, Barry likes to talk crap, and apparently this time he did it to the wrong guy. About a month after, I was riding home from work, and I was waiting for the light to change at Ventura Boulevard. Barry popped into my head. I still hadn't seen him in months, and for all I knew, he could be dead. It was a hot day, and I really just wanted to head straight home. But the voice in my head said, make a left. So I did, heading in the direction of the parking garage. At first, I didn't notice anyone, and then I saw Barry in the far rear of the garage. As I rode up, he greeted me with one of his usual lame gay jokes. I asked him about the stabbing, and he told me he was feeling better. And then he asked me if I'd do him a favor. Assuming he was going to ask me to go to Trader Joe's and get him some beer, I said sure. But instead, he asked me to change his wound dressings. He was stabbed 4 times in his right shoulder blade and couldn't do it himself. So before my brain could send up red flags about communicable diseases, I did. After changing his dressing, he offered me half a sandwich, which I declined. Though I could tell he wanted me to stay and chat, my dog needed to be let out, and I took my leave. As I was riding home, I started to pull the string on my relationship with Barry, and a couple of things stuck out. It's at times I've consciously gone outside of my comfort zone that have transformed me. Something as simple as riding a bike can save your life. Choosing not to walk by, to not ignore a guy like Barry gave me friendship. And I like to think in me, he got to see somebody acknowledge his humanity with a simple hello, a beer, and a change of bandage.
Where are we? Where are we? That's a real question. Say it again. Where we are? That's right. See, Unheard LA gives us the chance to explore SoCal stories, one meal or stage at a time. It also gives us a chance to highlight the community we're in, so place plays a part. So whether you are a local or you spend all your time here or you're just stopping by, there's always something new to discover. Please welcome to the stage, Jean-Paul de Guzman.
North Hollywood, it's the place to be. The desirability of this space, this place, this home has evolved over time and space, but time and time again. It has been the destination of dreams and the stage for reinvention. Like so much of the City of Angels, the streets of North Hollywood groan under a heavy legacy of bygone eras. Sherman Way and Hazeltine Avenue were named for Moses Hazeltine Sherman. Lancashire Boulevard for Isaac Lancashire. Land developers, titans of their industry. Streets that bear their names rise from the ground, with post-war houses and dingbat apartments, strip malls and strip clubs, and a landscape that often hides as much as it reveals. Before there was North Hollywood, there was the town of Lancashire. Before Lancashire, there were the Tongva people upon whose land we sit and celebrate. Though dislocated from their land for generations, they still persist. Heady days were to come thanks to the railroads. By the late 19th century, the Iron Horse transformed Los Angeles from a speck on the empire of the American West to a major metropolis. Agrarian outposts radiated out from that city. Drained from the Owens Valley after a controversial city election and piped in through the Los Angeles aqueduct, water transformed the Valle de San Fernando. It catalyzed local and global migrations that rivaled the ones that brought us the pupuserias and pad thai joints that pepper our streets today. Sprawling orchards of citrus replaced the once lucrative wheat fields that dominated North Hollywood. Prairie pioneers found a reprieve from their punishing winters in this land of seemingly endless sunshine. As they piled into their Model Ts, exploring the vastness of this valley, they created new identities as Angelenos. Additionally, an immigrant labor force, segmented by race but united in their desire to craft a better life for their American offspring, undergirded that new agrarian landscape. Mexican-American colonias and small Japanese-American farms began to dot that map. They crafted quirky, hybrid, rascuache communities that were cultures of both and, never either or. Third spaces, as we would say in grad school seminars. Home, as they would say. Forged from an alchemy of immigrant dreams and the cruelties of racial segregation, that American-born generation came of age in a time of jazz, experimentation, reconfigured gender roles, but also growing efforts to uproot those pesky others. The forced repatriation of Mexican and Mexican Americans, a convenient scapegoat during the Depression, the forced removal and mass incarceration of Japanese Americans, a convenient scapegoat during World War II. How quickly the bodies who built North Hollywood were erased. Out of that erasure, real estate magnates painted a new portrait, America's suburb, the San Fernando Valley. At its heart, North Hollywood. Those boosters carefully marketed the region. Rural, urban, useless categories. This was suburbia. This was comfort at its finest. This was, for a generation that survived the deprivation of the Great Depression and fought and won World War II. This truly was an American dream. The GIs, the Rosies, and their families. Ah, suburbia. The convenience of the modern era flaunted for the world to see, all brought to you by the convenience of racially restrictive covenants that kept some of those defenders of democracy at bay. Changes were afoot once more when the walls of segregation, through the efforts of activists and allies and accomplices, slowly crumbled. In the 1970s and 80s, the closure of major factories in the area led many suburbanites to find new communities in places like the Simi or Santa Clarita valleys. But refugees from war or economic privation, from Central America or the former USSR or Southeast Asia, made North Hollywood yet again the place to be. As we sit in this historic space, North Hollywood, or NoHo, as the influencers called it, long before they even knew they were influencers, continues to change, often in ways that connect our shared future to a distant past. Just look around us. The Red Line station is new, but it's not. Look back far enough and those railroads connected the world to that once small speck. The brick exterior of the Federal Bar next door reveals a past when Lankershim was the central business district of North Hollywood. So close, but far enough from the industry, this theater encapsulates our history as an extension of Hollywood. We're living in a new era of transformation for this hamlet, gentrification. For the historian, or for that matter, the Buddhist, change, whether people or landscapes, is the nature of all life. Is it good? Is it bad? That's for you to decide. But maybe this history may leave you with some appreciation of what is here and what is not.
When I was a kid, I shared a bunk bed in a room with my little sisters, and the television was our safe haven. We could always turn the volume up, and no matter what was going on outside, we knew we were safe inside. As I grew up, I realized that wasn't always true. Here to share, please welcome Adele Wilson.
It was the evening of January 16th, 1994. As I crawled into bed, I told my husband I was dreading tomorrow, but I couldn't figure out why. I was an art director in the middle of a commercial. I was positive I must have overlooked something, but everything seemed buttoned up. Finally, I drifted off to sleep. Just monkey mind. Everything the next day would be fine. Boy, was I wrong. At 4:31 a.m., we were awakened by the violent shaking of the Northridge Earthquake. We lived in a view house cantilevered over the side of a hill on Witzel Drive in Sherman Oaks. Terrified the house would fall down the hill, I lurched toward the door, shouting, "Run, run!" My husband pulled me back into bed and wrapped himself around me. Heavy chunks of cottage cheese ceiling crashed to the floor in the hallway outside our bedroom door. "No," he said softly, "we're staying right here." The noise was deafening as the earthquake tore the house apart around us. I cuddled into my husband and surrendered to my inevitable death. He was my soulmate. If this was the end, I wanted it to be with him. Suddenly I felt peaceful, warm and safe. And then I saw a bright light. You know, the light. The one they always talk about. I left my body and floated toward the brilliant, welcoming glow. I was free, joyful. And then the shaking stopped. I snapped back into my body. Wait a minute, where's that light? I was alive and very unhappy about it. My arms and legs felt like lead as we picked our way through the rubble in the hallway. I looked around the living room. Most of the walls were ripped open. My emotions toggled back and forth between depression and anger. Shoot, if I was dead right now, I wouldn't have to deal with this mess. We decided to head outside and check on our neighbors. Dazed people were emerging from their homes. Like zombies in pajamas, we all shuffled toward the top of the hill. It was too dark to see most of the damage, but when we rounded the curve, I froze. What I saw at that moment is forever burned in my memory. It was so charming. The little fence of brick pillars spanned by ornate wrought iron sections, the jumble of roses blossoming along the bottom, the perfectly manicured lawn behind them, and then nothing except a spectacular view of the San Fernando Valley. The entire house had pancaked down the hill. We all raced to the edge of the driveway and called down to the fallen house, hoping to hear some sign of life. but it was silent. A grim-faced neighbor told us the occupants were a lovely young couple. Both cars were in the garage. The gut-wrenching reality hit me that it was unlikely either one of them had survived. I felt sick. We turned away from the wreckage and walked back down the hill to our house. I stood in my living room and looked around. Everything I owned looked trashed, but at that moment, I felt like the luckiest person in the world. We knew our house would be red tagged, so the minute there was enough light to see our way around, we started throwing our stuff into garbage bags and boxes that were stashed in the garage. Helicopters appeared overhead. Moments later, the phone on the kitchen wall rang. It was a friend in New York. "Are you all right? A CNN chopper just zoomed in on your street sign." We quickly explained our situation. We needed a large truck as soon as possible. He promised to make some calls for us. An aftershock hit the house. We raced out the door. The sun was up and we could see that the neighborhood was seriously damaged. A large crack, 6 inches wide and 2 feet deep, ran up the middle of our road. And when it got to our house, it turned and headed for the living room. The phone rang. We hurried back inside. A friend in Marina Del Rey had seen the CNN story. When he heard we were homeless, he vowed to find us an apartment. New York called back. All the trucks in our area had been snapped up. We decided to keep hauling things out to the front yard and figure it out later. The next couple of hours were a blur. My nephew from Texas was in the area on business and showed up at the house to help. The producer on my commercial called to see what he could do. His office was in Santa Monica. He would dig around for a truck out there. At 4:30 that afternoon, an ashen-faced production assistant who had white-knuckled a 5-ton truck from Santa Monica to Sherman Oaks pulled up in front of our house. We were ecstatic. You know, it's amazing how fast you can fill a truck when you slam pack it. By 9 o'clock that night, we had unloaded our battered belongings into a Marina Del Rey apartment. Everything we owned was covered with a thick layer of gray dust. Exhausted, we crawled into bed surrounded by our refrigerator, washer, dryer, and barbecue grill. A 5-star hotel could not have been more luxurious lodgings than those of that night. The Northridge earthquake was a magnitude of 6.7. It lasted only 10 seconds, but it seemed like 10 years. The archives confirm that my neighbors perished that morning. All told, 58 people lost their lives and more than 9,000 were injured. That we walked away without a scratch, I credit to my husband's instincts. A couple days later, when we visited the house, we could see daylight through the walls of every single room except our bedroom, which remained completely intact. I'm sure there's an engineering explanation for this. It was a small room in the center of the house, but to us, it looked like the work of a guardian angel. Now, when I remember that day, I'm filled with gratitude. I'm grateful for our wonderful friends and family who came to our rescue so quickly. I'm grateful that I no longer care about stuff. Somehow that moment of losing everything except my husband set me free. I no longer collect crystalline china. Stuff doesn't matter. People matter. And I'm grateful that I'm not afraid to die. Someday when my time has arrived, I will float into that beautiful light, and that's just fine with me.
falling in love can make everything just disappear. It's like time stops. But what happens when you're not so in love anymore? I mean, the world didn't stop spinning just for you, did it? We're here to share his evolution. Please welcome William Wesley Walls.
I successfully completed 8,395 days, 12 hours, 14 minutes, and 22 seconds of marriage. It's no joke that the divorce papers were marked final by a judge on April Fool's Day 2010. But as a veteran salesman, that means I successfully sold myself and someone else on the idea for 23 whole years. And I'm very proud of that. After taking some time to recover from my not so happily ever after, I found myself in the SoCal dating scene complete with all the apps. Being a people person my whole life, I had thought that it would be pretty easy for me to find the next woman of my dreams. Well, nothing could have been further than the truth. The last time I'd been single, there'd been no internet. There'd been no swipe left, swipe right. The last time I'd been single, I was living in the Bay Area, not some giant megalopolis like LA. Here, I'm one in a sea of 10 million surrounded by shiny stuff and the most beautiful, in-shape people on the planet. You know, they say the average attention span is less than that of a goldfish, and that's 9 seconds. So, and that's before you add all the technology, profile pics, SoCal's go, go, go pace, and the option to swipe left, swipe right, factoring in SoCal, you got about 2 seconds. It's overwhelming. Why has it been so hard for me to close the deal when it comes to dating in SoCal? After all, I am a sales coach, and my website is I Am the Product. Being a sales guy is one of the things that has helped me make sense of dating in SoCal for these last 9 years. You see, in sales, in this world of talking to people, there's steps. It's like a roadmap. It's like a checklist. You build rapport, you ask questions, you form a connection, and then you close. One of the first things they teach you in sales is people buy from who they know and who they like. You build trust. Building rapport is finding what you have in common with the other person. If I'm on a sales call, I'm in a guy's office, he's got a picture of a 1936 Ford truck, mag wheels, wheelie bar kit, I know what to do. I'm gonna ask, what's the horsepower? I'm a car guy. I've tried to bring some of these insights into the dating adventures too. If my date says she's from a big family, wow, I'm from a big family. My date says her mom's from the South, you get out of here. My mama from the South. Oh, you say you voted for Trump? Oh, okay. No, can't say I voted for Trump. Shame on me, didn't read your entire profile. Can't go by just looks. In sales, once you've respectfully gained rapport, then you can ask questions. It's critical to ask questions because most of the time, there are things you need to know too. I found some really helpful, for me, ways to translate this into dating. In sales, we ask, so who's servicing your account now? On a date, it's more like, does your ex actually know he's your ex? In sales, we ask, what do you like or dislike about the service that you're receiving now? On a date, do you have warrants? In sales, so who have you done business with in the past? On a date, so what was that warrant for? In sales, what's your time frame around deciding? On a date, regarding that warrant, did you actually do that? In dating, building and having rapport is super important because questions without rapport is interrogation. Interrogation is never good for anybody in any dating scenario. Now, let's talk about the very important topic, bait and switch. In sales, in the state of California, consumer laws consider bait and switch a form of retail sales fraud. Not in dating. At the end of the day, sales is all about the in-person human connection that can never be outsourced. And if you are fortunate enough to get and keep someone's attention and find true love in Southern California's dating gauntlet maze, it could lead to the ultimate connection and the ultimate question, the closing question. In the past, I've had the honor and experience of asking the question, will you marry me? And I was actually lucky, and I actually got a yes. But truth be told, from a sales perspective, this is a horrible question because it's called what's a closed probe. In other words, you can get a yes or a no. It's a 50-50 shot. If I was to ever come across that needle in a haystack of being one lucky man in a sea of 10 million very busy, good-looking people, and I found myself facing the ultimate connection, leading to the honorable question once again, my question would be what they call in sales an open probe. It gives the person the opportunity to speak freely, which is a good thing. You open yourself up to more than a yes or a no. My question would start with, my love, tell me, so what are your thoughts on, but I'm not there yet?
A little kindness goes a long way. Good deeds come back to you tenfold. There are so many quotes about the importance of helping others and being a good person, but one way to impart that knowledge is through story. Here to enlighten us all, please welcome Lubna Hassania.
It was the summer of 1982. Having been born and raised in Beirut, Lebanon, in times of civil wars and invasions, I'd had my fair share of having to flee home for safer grounds or running to a shelter and wait the fighting out. These were scary times for everyone, especially a young child. That summer day in 1982 was like no other I'd seen. On that day, my family and I came face to face with death. So close was the encounter, I would say it's a miracle I am standing here today. We woke up to the sound of explosions. They seemed to be far away at first, but were undeniably closing in on us by midday. My city was full of people like you and me. And we were trapped. All roads out of the city were blocked. From the south, a mighty invasion with the latest technology in weaponry. From the north, civil war blockades. To the west, the beautifully shimmering Mediterranean Sea. My country, Lebanon, divided with no army to protect its people. Anxiety was building around the house. My parents' whispers and nervous moves were things I had learned to pick up on throughout my childhood. Suddenly, what looked like snowflakes fell from the sky. But this was June. Confetti? Only in my dreams. They were leaflets pouring from the sky, celestial messages carrying a gentle warning. To all the families of Beirut, you must evacuate immediately. We began packing, called a few relatives, and filled them in on our plan. My mother instructed my siblings and me to use the bathroom one last time. We had to leave. Heading north was the only way out. My brother, who was 40 years old then, insisted on taking his pets with him. My mother had bought him several newborn chicks that he was raising in a cardboard box. He carried the box on his lap the whole ride that day. It was a hellish ride. The plan, looking back at it, was ludicrous, but it was our only chance at survival. We drove through a part of the city where we were not welcome, hoping to find the way to the other side without having to stop and ask for directions. Reluctant drivers are easily noticed, especially when militiamen in watchtowers are trained to spot them from a distance. My father dug through his memory, trying to figure out the way to the other side, but not before a militia jeep pulled us over. An armed man pointed his rifle at my father. "Where do you come from?" When my father's answer didn't please him, he barked out, "Follow me." My father's face turned gray. My father, my source of comfort and strength, looked defeated, and my hope went with him. My older sister started crying. My younger sister wrapped her arms around my little brother, who was oblivious to it all. "Don't just follow him," my mother cautioned. My father, loud in his silence, followed the armed man through neighborhoods and narrow streets. Life was going on as usual in this part of the city. People running errands, filling street cafes, and carrying conversations one balcony to another, all 20 minutes from the hell we just left. After what seemed like forever, we arrived to an outdoor parking lot filled with cars that were packed with people's belongings, with the children and the elderly. We were asked to hand over our IDs and ordered to park and wait. I don't remember how long we waited, but it was long enough for my mind to go through multiple scenarios, all fit for horror movies. The car next to us had a young couple with 3 children, a family in distress. The 2 young girls in the back seat were stiff like a board. The mother in the front was trying to breastfeed her wailing infant. The father reached his head out, trying to connect with my father. They did their talking with their eyes. Finally, an armed young man tapped on my father's window. Behind him stood 2 more men, rifles in hand. They interrogated my father, wanting to know why we'd come, who we were, and where we were heading. I remember hearing one of the guys in the back shouting, "Just get him out." On and on the interrogation went. Then suddenly, I realized the conversation had shifted, and the armed man's tone had started to soften. He now wanted to know where exactly my father's grocery business was located on the other side of Beirut. It seemed he knew the area very well. "When I was a child," he said, "my mom used to send me to your store to run her errands. We lived 2 buildings away from you," he continued. "You probably don't recognize me anymore. But when my dad died and money became a struggle, you knew our predicament. And you, sir, did not charge us for our food." He opened my father's door and helped him step out of the car. He took my father in his arms and kept him there for quite some time, all the while apologizing and saying how he always wanted to pay him back. I remember thinking, could that be happening? What are the odds? Are we safe now? Can we go? He handed back our IDs and assured my father that he would show us the way out. My mother once again cautioned my father against following. Once again, my father had all his senses focused on the Jeep in front of him. It took a long time to get us out of that area. We were blindly following the armed man through off-road shortcuts, all the while our heads hitting the ceiling of the car and the poor chicks going in full flight over every ditch in the road. Eventually, that road took us out of Lebanon and onto a path to Los Angeles. I fell in love with the city and the field of cancer research, where I like to think I've gotten to save lives the way the armed man saved ours. But no matter how far I've traveled from 1982 Beirut, I can't help but wonder about those two girls in the car next to ours. What road did they go down? Were they spared too?
I've been playing video games since the very first Nintendo, but I always had trouble picking my character. I just could never tell who represented me. Others had better luck and saw themselves clearly from the very beginning. Please welcome Pickle.
When I was a child, I had a fascination with gowns and jewels. One time when I was 6, my mother gave me my dead grandmother's diamond engagement ring to play with by the public pool. Needless to say, it no longer belongs to us. And to be fair, Mom and Grandma had a complicated relationship. I also really liked video games. I wasn't particularly good at them, but I made the effort because that's what my friends liked and I enjoyed them. That's what video games are about, right? My favorite game? Super Smash Brothers. Basically, you pick a character from a classic Nintendo game and fight each other to the death in different battlefields. My character of choice? Princess Peach. She had this pink frilly gown with an emerald brooch on it, a cheap-looking crown, and yellow hair, and she did all her fighting in pumps. When she stood still, the breeze would catch the bottom of her dress, and she looked so dignified, so royal. Her attacks were hitting the other players with a frying pan or hurtling her derriere at someone who would then explode on contact. And she had this voice. She would say things like, "Sweet," or "Ho-cha," and I ate it up. Also, the best way to play as Princess Peach was to float around the edges of the playing field because she could, hover magically. And since I wasn't that good at video games, the other boys underestimated me and would forget that I was even there until they had beaten each other down and had no health points. Then I came in with my pink frock and frying pan and beat them into submission. A tactic I'm happy to say I still employ in my adult life. I loved her. More specifically, I wanted to become her. So I would play in the backyard, echoing the syrupy timbre of her squeals, queen of the toadstools, whatever that means. When I was 10 years old, I convinced my parents to get me a gown from Goodwill and these shiny white wedding gloves from a store at the Beverly Center, just like the ones she had. And I shoved my hammy fingers into those gloves and desperately squeezed my stout frame into that pink muslin or taffeta. It wasn't even pink. It was like mauve. I do love a good dusty mauve. Whenever I was feeling dramatic, I would disappear from the living room and reemerge without a word in my Princess Peach fantasy. I'd perch on an ottoman with all the grace and dignity that a chubby, uncoordinated preteen could possibly muster. Then one day, the dress disappeared from my closet. My parents were concerned. It wasn't quite normal for a young boy to do that, they thought. I started to see a child therapist, and my woven pink dreams sort of tumbled to the ground, now a pile of forgotten cheap thread. The dress was gone, and my friends weren't really buying into the Barbie fight club I was trying to start, where we would buy Barbie dolls and make them fight to the death with the most dangerous weapon of all, glamour. I still dreamed of wearing gowns and luscious hair and jewels and saying things like, "Go to the moon, you selfish dreamer!" It's Katharine Hepburn, okay. My dreams were red acrylics and a side-eye. Now, years later, I read to children often for Drag Queen Story Hour. Thank you. And when I can, I wear a pink dress. I know my parents were doing the best that they could with what they had and what they knew. They wanted to protect me, just like I want to protect the children I meet. I want to protect them from the idea of permanence. I want to show them that our imagination is limited only by the weight of our own fear. I thought maybe if I had seen someone like Pickle, maybe it wouldn't have taken as long to fight my fear of dress up to become who I am today. At a story hour recently, a boy who we'll call Rebecca wore a beautiful red dress. He was shy but asked to take a photo with me anyway. After, his mother confided in me that he was wearing a dress in public for the first time. I didn't feel anything extraordinary in the moment. It's hard when you're performing and smiling and taking photos to process emotions. Ask Beyoncé. I smiled and thanked her and sent them on their way. But I think of Rebecca often, and I'm deeply proud of them. It was perhaps the most tangible piece of evidence that this thing I was participating in had a lasting and meaningful impact on the people it touched. I wanted to share this because not a lot of dreams necessarily come true, and I don't think they should. We don't usually know what's best for us and what will really make us happy in the long run. That's just up to how the universe goes. But a lot of little dreams do come true. And for me, this little dream of one day being able to be a version of Princess Peach did. And I'm grateful for that. Even if I can't make you explode with my butt or hide frying pans in my pocket, I can assure you I'm working on it.
When the going gets tough, the tough get going. You've heard that before, but did you ever get going? Yeah, it's scary. Venturing out into the unknown, but taking that leap might lead you home. Here to take us home, please welcome Sean Sullivan.
I have a disability called autism that causes me to stand out and be seen differently and frequently treated differently and unfortunately poorly at times. When I was 17, I was 2,000 miles away from home at an awful boarding school where I was abused. I was forced to sleep outside on the concrete with no covers and no pillow. Teachers would pour cold water on me while I was asleep, and so would students. I was not allowed to go out in the community, and when I asked the question, why? Why are you doing this to me? Why are you putting me through this? They would say it was because you have a disease called autism. One day, the school found out that they were being investigated by the police. And they decided to take us, the students, to an island in Washington. The island had a whole lot of plant life and beautiful flowers. We walked around and explored the island. Sadly, they took my shoes away, so I had to walk barefooted. I noticed a kayak in one part of the island. In that moment in time, The kayak seemed to signify the end of my torments and imprisonment and the beginning of a new and better life for me. It was a tool sent from the heavens to help me escape and get to my new beginning. With all the thoughts racing in my head, I didn't really think about how I would escape. I just waited until 2 a.m. and got into the kayak with no life jacket, no previous kayak experience. Funny, right? I left the island behind and the school behind. I just kept on kayaking toward the Space Needle, toward Seattle. While I was kayaking, the only light I had was the stars up in the night sky. There were waves making it very hard to control the kayak, wind making it ever so colder, nighttime in the open water. With shipping lanes, it made it like a life or death version of dodgeball. If my kayak toppled over, it was all over. If I got hit by a ship, it was all over. The only thing that that got me through this ordeal was the thought of freedom. And at last, I reached the shore. Finally, I was free. It was only later that I realized that it was an 8-mile journey. When I finally got to Seattle, I had no idea where the police station was, but I did see a highway. And so I went to the highway and pretended like I was a cheerleader in hopes that someone would call the police. I didn't have any previous cheerleading experience either. Eventually, someone called the police arrived, and I told them everything. The police took me to a waiting area that had a place for me to sleep on an actual bed with real-life covers and everything, and pillows. I could not believe my eyes. I found out a couple months later that the school had been shut down. In case you're wondering how I got to California, it wasn't right away. First, I was sent to a different boarding school in Michigan. I hated being away from home, so I ran away to California. How did I get the money to get to California? I went up to people and said, I represent the Red Cross. Then I took that money to buy a Greyhound ticket that brought me all the way to my dad's apartment. I could have gone to New Jersey, but I thought California was closer. Either way, I was finally home, and I've been here for 15 years now.
And that's our show. Lots of love to our storytellers. Let us know how we did with the show today by texting Unheard LA to 63735. Thank you all to the folks that make Unheard LA possible, and thank you to our growing Unheard LA family. All the folks here at the Airport Towel Theater, and the California Wellness Foundation for their amazing support of this project. Everybody has a story. What's yours? Share it with us at kpcc.org/unheardla. Our next full show will be May 19th in Little Tokyo, but before that, we'll be showcasing some past Unheard LA storytellers at Grand Park's Our LA Voices Festival on April 27th and 28th. And once again, thank you for coming. Before you leave, clap for yourself, please. And before you leave, make sure you grab one of these printed programs on the way out and stick around for the mixer that starts about now, where I invite you to introduce yourself, meet someone new, and tell them where you're from. And remember, whatever you do, don't leave here tonight with your story unheard. Bless you. Good night.